thank you, Ty, for an excellent dialogue. Let me just remove our spotlight. And our last dialogue is going to be on the intersectionality of tech, human, animal, and planet rights with Olivia Swaak-Goldman, Ravi Mariwala, and David Cohen, moderated by Dan.
Great. Are we still having some trouble with getting Olivia in, or is that sorted now? I can't really tell.
We are. I think Lucas is working with her. Lucas,
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe resend Lucas in case she hasn't received the email.
Yeah,
Hi, Ravi.
I'll resend.
David.
Sure. Hey guys, how are you all doing?
Hi Radhika, hi David, hi Dan. How are you guys doing? I hope all of you are
Hello,
well.
Ravi. Hello, Radhika. Hello, everyone.
Doing well, doing well. Nice to see you guys could get in easy. We've had some weird technical issues today, it seems, which is
Okay.
Apologies, bear with us for a minute, but good
Yeah.
morning, good evening, and I guess good afternoon. There are people joining us from all over the world. So.
And it's an early morning out here in Bombay. So
what time is it now, Ravi?
it's about 6:30 a.m. So that's all right. I got up about 45 minutes ago and I have a nice cup of coffee with me.
How early do you normally wake up? You're an early riser?
Well, normally I'm up by about 6, but I've just kind of recovered from a COVID bout. So I'm feeling a little drained. So I get up a little later. So.
Right. Okay. Should we just give another minute or two while she comes in?
Yeah, or perhaps in a minute or two get started, and then you can have perhaps Ravi and David go first, and then Olivia can
Sure.
go next. So,
yeah, that may make sense. Should we just maybe give one more minute, and if not, then we can just get started. Regardless. And how are you, David, as well?
I'm doing fine. I had no difficulty logging in at all. I just used the link that was sent a while ago. So.
Yeah. And you should be nearby his campus, is that right? Or
yeah, I am across the street from his campus.
Lovely, very nice. I guess we should just get started first then, and she can just join in, and hopefully that's sorted soon. Yeah, does that sound okay, Radhika?
I think so. Yeah, I think we have people have been on a long day. We started at 8 o'clock, so I would suggest get started.
Yeah. So yeah. Welcome everybody. I hope everyone who's still here after a long day. I hope we've all enjoyed the variety of speakers and panels we've had so far. For me as well, it's been almost a personal inspiration to hear almost the multitude of incredible stories and insights into how sustainability, how technology can shape our post-pandemic world. As a quick introduction, my name is Dan Healy. I'm a student here at Stanford, and I'm fortunate enough to currently be on campus, where every day it almost seems like we're resuming to normal levels of activity. So I have the pleasure today of introducing our two right now, but hopefully 3 very soon, amazing speakers, as well as moderating this exciting panel on the title of which is the intersectionality of tech and human, animal, and earth rights. So first, welcome to Ravi Mariwala, what I would describe as an aficionado in the field of sustainability in the outdoors. The chief executive scientific position. Ravi works to provide integrated water solutions for pretty much all types of communities in both rural and urban parts of India. So very inspiring stuff. He kind of has this vision of providing everyone in India access to sustainable and safe water, and he actually also happens to be the father of our former base's co-president Vibhav, which is, I would say, another accomplishment in and of itself. A very tough task, maybe. Secondly, a warm welcome to David Cohen, a distinguished expert in the field of human rights and transitional justice. He's also, a founding director of what eventually came to be the Center for Human Rights and International Justice here at Stanford. And he's also led, a variety of human rights projects in all parts of the world, including Indonesia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, etc. And Olivia as well, final welcome. Known for, she's very well known for her truly inspiring work as the executive director of the Wildlife Justice Commission. So, with over 2 decades of experience in international justice, diplomacy, and humanitarian law, Olivia is an expert in the field of, particularly this intersection between human and earth rights, which is, of course, what we're concerned with. So I think I will hand it over then first to Ravi, if that's all right, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I have a short 3 or 4 slide presentation to put the problems in perspective, if that's all right. I'll quickly share that. Can you see that?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's coming up now.
right. So
Great.
I just want to take you through a quick the issue of the problems I face in India and India faces itself with regards to water and sustainability and SDGs. So if you look at the 17 SDGs, what we have out here, the sixth one deals with clean water and sanitation. But I cannot look at it in isolation. If I address the clean water and sanitation issues, then I think it does affect many of the other SDGs. If you look at SDG 14, you look at SDG 13, somehow or the other they get affected by it. So if we act on one, it has got a literally a multiplier effect on other SDGs, and that's what really excites me, because it's just not one thing which improves, but a lot many more things which we improve. Having said that, let's put the problem of water in perspective for India, where I normally work. And I would kind of divide it into six segments out here. The first one is the water availability, the water quality, water use, water access, sewage treatment, and water and health. And if I look at these six buckets, what we find is India has got a lot of precipitation. We get almost 4,000 cubic kilometers of water, which is huge. And 50% of that runs off, and which is very necessary, because that is something which keeps the rivers alive and the environment healthy. And it's very necessary to do that. The usable resources which we can do, we can use currently is about 1,100 cubic kilometers. And the largest crisis on our hand with respect to water is two things. One is groundwater depletion, which is going down very fast, especially in the northern region, and the contamination. And I think if we don't address these two, we are sitting on a really we are sitting on a huge challenge and a problem going forward. The second issue is about water quality. The water quality varies across all the regions, because India has got pretty complex topography, geology, and various regions. So the key areas of concern out here is biological contaminations, salinity and fluoride increase because of over extraction of water, and arsenic and iron, which are present naturally, mostly in the eastern part of India. And these have to be addressed. The other emerging contaminants which we see in the Western world are something like pesticide residues. Those are not as bad, but they are increasing slowly. So those will have to be addressed going forward. In terms of water usage, I think this is where there is a lot of behavioral change which is necessary. Our agricultural sector consumes the largest amount of water. Potable industrial and power sectors are, I think, pretty well placed. I'm not too worried about that. But agricultural water, we consume about 80 to 85% of our water is consumed by agriculture. And that's a very, very inefficient way of doing agriculture, mostly through flood irrigation. And that really requires a tremendous amount of thought and how we are going to go forward. And I describe the challenges why the issue is the way it is today. The water access is another huge challenge. And currently, the government has also launched a mission to provide tap to every home, which I think is a great mission. I really wish them luck and really wish them the best to get that succeeded, because 163 million people in India don't have access to clean water, and about more than 500 million people don't have access to sanitation, and both require a water access, easy water access. In terms of connections of water, 70% of the urban area is connected. It's got pipe water, whereas only 30% in the rural area have got pipe water. So this is a huge challenge. And as a result of this, women spend almost about 150 million work days a year to fetch water. And this just fetching water amounts to almost around 10 billion Indian rupees, or 135 million US dollars loss every year. So imagine the magnitude of the problem. The sewage treatment is another ticking time bomb. We only treat about 25% of our sewage, and as a result of it, most of our water bodies are biologically contaminated. And we need to address this on a war footing basis, otherwise it's going to be a public health issue. And because of these issues with water, we have a lot of public health issues. 21% of the country's diseases are coming from water. There's a lot of malnutrition because of waterborne diseases, and more than 300,000 children under the age of 5 die due to waterborne diseases. So this is a huge challenge also, and it also affects some of the SDGs out here. And to simplify the whole problem, I've kind of broken it down into the four sections. One is the ownership and governance of water. Second is the awareness and the education. The third one is the managing the water and resources and building human resources to manage water. And the last one is science and technology. And if I highlight one or two key challenges in these areas, we have to really address whom does the water belong to. And I've been working with a kind of a think tank which is focused on the constitutional rights of water, which is very interesting to look at because the weeds within the weeds are very interesting. And second thing is, can we ensure water as a constitutional right? I think these are some of the very important questions we need to address. The next one is about awareness and education. Creating awareness and education about it in terms of quality, quantity, who uses what, etc., is very important. The third one being management and human resources is that how can we develop economic models around water which are sustainable? And India possesses a very different challenge, which I'll just briefly talk after this. Create HR, that's the human resources, where we really create water champions which look at water in a very holistic and integrated manner, just not from the point of view of technology, but also from the point of view of access, economics, sociological issues, and issues on ground. And of course, science and technology, which is most relevant and needed at this time of the year. That is something like mapping of the groundwater, purification systems, sewage treatment, etc. So this is how I can describe the problems in a nutshell. And I just want to share a case I recently came across. I had partially supported it because I thought this was a very interesting way of looking at it. And this happened in the foothills of the Himalayas, about 6-hour drive from New Delhi, north 6-hour drive north of New Delhi. And there's this area is very rich in water resources, but still irrigation is an issue. And this area grows a lot of cane sugar. So there were a number of interventions done over a period of 2 years. One was on the demand side, where better farming techniques and education of farmer was done. And a role of micronutrients was explained to the farmers, and they were shown how to use micronutrients. On the supply side, the water canals were repaired, and water was provided in an adequate and timely manner with proper flow measurements. And there was a local institutional support from the local irrigation board. The impact of this was that it managed to save 50 million liters of water in 10 months' time. The yields of sugarcane improved dramatically, and the Karhula River, which was dying, got rejuvenated. So it affected a lot of the SDGs out here. The key challenge which comes out of this particular small case is how can the model be made sustainable? How can one navigate the administration? Because I think navigating the administration is one of the largest challenges we have. And how does scaling happen in this kind of a situation? The key thing you remember out here is that water is virtually not charged for in India. And as a result, there is a tremendous kind of a weakness to build an economic and sustainable model around it. So the largest challenge in my mind today is how do we make sustainable model around water, which takes into account the historical past and the sociological aspects of it. I think I'll stop out here, and we can take it on from there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you for your insights. And the water, especially now in pretty much every country, is becoming more and more of a a hotspot. A lot of statistics that I think a lot of young people are seeing nowadays about the scarcity of water and what society will look like even in 20, 15 years from now. So yeah, thank you very much for your insights. Welcome to Olivia, who thank you for joining us. With apologies for the technical issues. Zoom seems to be almost selecting speakers today to almost bully in terms of the technical issues. But yeah, so for Olivia joining now, we're gonna have the opportunity to hear from our other two panelists and then probably open the space up to some questions if we have the time for that. So I will push it over to David now if you're ready to say something, give a presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers for including me and for all the work that's gone into this event. And I'm very pleased to be on the same panel with these two distinguished speakers. So I'm going to keep it brief because I think it is important that we have time for some discussion and questions. first of all, I would just like to thank Ravi for pointing out the multiplier effects in regard to the SDGs in his presentation, and the need for an integrated approach to the SDGs. Although the SDGs were intended to sort of move us beyond a siloed approach to development and human rights, I think often we encounter the same silos. It's just they're framed in terms of the SDGs. And, you know, I meet people who say, I work on SDG 7, I work on SDG 13, whatever. Well, the whole point of the SDGs is to understand that in order really to solve any of these global issues, we need to address them all. That brings me, I guess, to a brief comment I want to make in general, and then I'll give 2 examples of projects that our center is engaged in. I mean, there's a number of them, but these are 2 that I'm personally involved in, where we're using technology to promote sustainability. I guess a general comment is that in regard to, we're on a panel on human rights, animal rights, and earth rights. I understand the first component of that much better than I understand the other 2, I have to say, but which is not to diminish the importance of what they represent, but the sort of approach that I would take is through our intergenerational responsibilities of the rights of future generations to inherit a planet that is sustainable and an environment that can sustain human communities in dignity rather than in resource scarcity and the kind of conflicts and deprivations that it produces. Having said that, I'll briefly mention two different kinds of projects that I'm personally involved in through the center. One has to do with using technology to address issues of exploitation, slavery, and human trafficking in fishing industries. And although this is on the labor side, it's intimately related to sustainable fishing practices in general, IUU fishing, and so forth. And so we, meaning our center and the Ocean Solutions Center at Stanford, were approached by a consortium called the International Seafood Sustainability Federation, which represents about 80% of the global tuna industry. And by value, tuna is one of the most important multi-billion-dollar fisheries, as I'm sure you know. And they approached us to get help on how to ensure that nowhere in their global supply chains was there human trafficking, modern day slavery, or exploitation of workers. The problem is that big companies in the fishing industries do not control their supply chains. And the supply chains are attenuated, multinational, and present all sorts of problems. So we're doing a pilot in Indonesia, which we would like to scale up globally. There's various reasons why we picked Indonesia, one of which is that Indonesian fishers represent one of the largest groups of national groups of fishing crew in the world. So what we're doing is working with workers groups, with regulatory agencies, with civil society, and so forth, to develop digital platforms for payments and contracts that can provide transparency in the supply chain, so that both regulators, companies, workers, and others have access to contracts and can provide some assurance that contracts meet the minimum labor standards of the relevant countries, as well as global human rights standards. And of course, on the payment side, it's to eliminate the very common practice that fishing crew do not receive the amount they contract for, usually to their surprise and dismay. And then there's the issue of legal remedies, which the kind of individuals who are typically fishing crew are ill-equipped to pursue. So that's one example. The other is in an initial stage and is more ambitious, and it has to do with seaweed. And this really relates to a number of SDGs, food security in particular, seaweed products, which are already in many pharmaceutical and cosmetic projects, are rapidly emerging as a very important source of protein and nutrients for a growing global population. There's a huge amount of research going into this. It also has an impact on climate change because of the reduction in methane from cows with the introduction of 1% of a particular form of seaweed into their feed. But what we're focusing on is coastal communities and creating sustainable environments and sustainable communities. And we're using technology, or will use technology in a number of ways, but initially through a philanthropist in Singapore who's leading this project, we plan to map the coastline of all of ASEAN, the 10 countries constituting Southeast Asia. And the initial pilot is to map the coastline of Singapore and one area in Indonesia in order to test the technology. And the idea will be to identify, I mean, right now seaweed farming is done at a very small scale of family farms. There's issues there of their remoteness from markets and the power dynamics that prevent them from getting fair prices, which we also want to address. But it's also to understand the coastal environments and to provide information to the farmers, to the government, and identify the areas that are better or ideal for seaweed farming by integrating large data sets into the mapping, so as to provide all sorts of information on coastal conditions, ocean conditions, temperatures, water currents, shipping lanes, and all sorts of factors that affect the sustainability of the communities and their ability to successfully engage in this kind of farming. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Dan.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, David. Thank you for your insights. I think it's especially interesting considering your work in Indonesia. Very almost exciting market. A lot of finance people especially would say in terms of its growing population. It's almost this shame where there's this correlation between you would say maybe the technological maturity of a country and then the kind of labor abuses that might occur, other human rights labor abuses that might occur in that country. It's a bit of a shame.
And sorry to come back in, but it's remarkable how many people are surprised when they hear that Indonesia is the 4th most populous country in the world.
Exactly right.
Building on what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. And we'll turn it over to Olivia for our final panelist of the day. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the kind invitation. And it's really an honor to be participating in this and with these distinguished experts. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the problem of wildlife trafficking, what it means, the innovative solution that the Wildlife Justice Commission has come up with, and the role of technology in terms of being part of the solution, but also being really part of the problem. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to touch on these 3 aspects in the time today. So the problem, what is wildlife crime? What are we talking about? Wildlife crime refers to crimes related to terrestrial and marine animals, as well as fisheries. David already mentioned the IUU fishing problem, as well as forestry issues. And it's the 4th largest transnational organized crime. I think similar to people being surprised by Indonesia being the 4th largest populous country, people are always surprised by hearing that wildlife crime is the 4th largest transnational organized crime. So it's huge, and it's grown explosively over the last 2 decades. The World Bank came out with a report last year that estimated the financial consequences are up to $1 to $2 trillion per year. So it's just massive amounts of financial consequences. And as a result, the criminals that are engaging in this, right, it doesn't just happen. Criminals are organizing it. And they're fueled by big profits and low risks. And massive corruption at every stage of the supply chain is what facilitates it all. Now, traditional conservation-led approaches aren't suited to tackle the criminality underpinning the trafficking. And law enforcement responses, unfortunately, have been weak and under-resourced, which means that high-level criminals, those that are organizing the crimes and their networks, have been untouched and really profitable. Meanwhile, our planet's species are being decimated, according to a 2019 IBIS report on threats to biodiversity, which I imagine you've all seen or read. We're close to losing more than 1 million species in the coming decade, and that's just terrifying. An estimated 2 million hectares of land were illegally logged between 2000 and 2012. And obviously this has a role in contributing to climate change, and global fishing stocks are being depleted, endangering the stability of marine ecosystems. So these crimes have a big impact, not only on our biodiversity, but also on the economies, global security, and as we've seen currently with the pandemic, on public health as well. And as David said, in effect, what these criminals are doing are taking away the rights of future generations to have a safe and healthy planet, and to be able to enjoy the biodiversity that we've been lucky enough to have. So the impact is really large, and thus the need to break down the criminal networks behind this trafficking has never been bigger. Now, the innovative solution, the Wildlife Justice Commission, it was created with an idea centered around justice and the urgency to prevent entire species from being decimated. It's based on the model of the international courts and tribunals, but created as a nonprofit, with the idea of going after those most responsible for trafficking in the most vulnerable species. And those of you that are familiar with international criminal law and the courts and tribunals will recognize some of that language in terms of those most responsible for the gravest crimes. And the idea is to really go after these criminal networks. And it was created in 2015, and what we've seen now, a few years later, is it's incredibly effective. Over 29 criminal networks have been disrupted. More than 135 high-level traffickers have been arrested, with 100% conviction rates in the cases that have gone through the court system. So it's really, really effective, which is great to see that it works. And the model was innovative in 2 ways. The first is in its use of intelligence-led investigations, and the second is in its insistence on accountability. Now, in terms of intelligence analysis, although this is commonly used to fight other forms of transnational organized crime, it's virtually absent in the toolbox that's applied to fighting wildlife crime. And what's interesting is intelligence analysis is an incredible force multiplier when the problem is vast and resources are small, because it allows the enforcement to focus on those where the impact will be the biggest. So it's really important to have intelligence analysis part of what you're using in order to get an overarching vision of what's happening. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So there've been major holes in the global intelligence picture of wildlife crime. And what the Wildlife Justice Commission does is it applies the tools and techniques that are used to combat other forms of transnational organized crime, including not only intelligence analysis, but undercover operations, and uses that to fight wildlife crime. We now have the largest intelligence team dedicated to wildlife crime in the world, and we regularly lend our undercover operatives to governments to really help them to move along and ratchet up their ability to go after these criminal networks. Moreover, even when intelligence has been collected, it's generally not been shared. So governments focus on what's happening within their borders. They're not that interested in what's happening elsewhere. And obviously, if you're talking about this type of crime, it's transnational. So we really need to be sharing that intelligence and that information and looking at it across the whole supply chain. And if we're not doing that, it makes it incredibly difficult to actually go after those most responsible. And that's what hasn't been happening up until now. So that's an important aspect that the Wildlife Justice Commission brings to fighting this crime. So to this end, the Wildlife Justice Commission seeks to understand the supply chain from source to demand and those that it involves, and it brings a unique global intelligence understanding of the trafficking. We undertake years-long investigation, so this is not a quick fix. It takes time, but you've got to invest in that if you really want to go after the kingpins and bring them to justice, and that's what we've been doing. But just because we collect this great information, this intelligence that we turn into evidence, we give it to the government, it doesn't necessarily mean that the governments are going to do what we've asked them to do. They've got other reasons, including a fair amount of corruption, why they would not want to do that. And that's the second part of the innovation of the Wildlife Justice Commission model, which is its insistence on accountability. So we have a possibility to hold a government accountable in a public hearing as a last resort. So these public hearings, they bring together experts in international law and experts in fighting organized crime, and they review the case file and see if there is a prima facie evidence that crimes have been committed, that the government knew about it, and that they should be, that they didn't take action. Now, luckily, we've only had to do this one time. It involves a case of industrial scale trafficking of wildlife products in Vietnam. And since we had that public hearing, we've not only worked really closely with the Vietnamese authorities, helping them to secure their largest domestic seizures ever of ivory, rhino horn, and pangolin scales, but also all other governments that we've confronted with evidence have taken significant steps. So while we haven't had to use it very much, this innovative aspect is really important in securing change, and it's a really important part of our model. I guess finally, what I'd like to talk about is the role of technology. And I know we have very limited time, so I'll just touch upon two issues. And one is part of the solution. So as I mentioned, intelligence analysis is absolutely key to solving this problem. And that involves a significant database. It means getting all that information, open source information, engaging with traffickers at a really high level, and using the technology in the database to really understand this global supply chain. That's critical. If you're not doing that, you're not going to solve the problem. But on the other, and it also allows us, use the latest high-tech stuff to get compelling evidence in our undercover operations. So that's really important as well. But on the other hand, technology can be a part of the problem. Social media has brought us all closer, but it's also normalized certain behavior. And think of what we see on social media with pictures of people with tiger cubs as pets, or with carved rhino horn. That's all become a little bit more normal than it should be. And it also leads to the commodification of nature. As well as the e-marketplaces and social media platforms have facilitated the buying of these wild animals, which is obviously something that needs to be monitored very closely. And I know there are important steps being taken in that regard. So I guess what I'd like to do just in the end to kind of echo some of the comments that David and Ravi made in terms of the need to engage in this kind of dialogue and discussion to get out of our silos, because that's really the problem. It happens nationally with governments when they're not doing task force to fight wildlife crime, but just as much if we're all looking how to solve some of these interrelated problems, we need to be thinking together. So I think this is a great start, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here and for everybody's attention. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I think, in the news as well, we're always reading one of the greatest shames of almost the problem with trading of illegal wildlife is it's so lucrative, for the people who are engaged in it. And obviously that trade-off between how lucrative it is and obviously, the variety of ethical and moral complications that come with it. It really is at some point up to the people and the governments to decide what is really more valuable, which, in our case and definitely in yours, should be the moral complications. So yeah, thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your thoughts. I think we're going to move on to some questions and answers, if you guys don't mind. One of the first ones, I think most likely we can begin by addressing it to Ravi, and then of course, if David and Olivia, if you want to jump in, we can always hear your thoughts as well. The question is, I'm just reading from the Q&A here. I've read that at least 2 billion people don't have access to drinking water. That's 2 out of 7 people globally. Why has it taken so long to address this global issue? And why is this not front of mind for the world's best minds to solve?
Dan, that's a great question. I kind of mulled upon it thanks to the COVID pandemic. And when I was locked down at home, there was enough time to think about it. There are 2 or 3 things which come to my mind where we have not been able to address it. I feel fundamentally, and I'm more context is within India because that's where I've normally worked, is, it's an issue of governance, first of all. Whom does the water belong to? I think that was one of the main questions. And in India, at least the law is that whoever owns the land, the water belongs to them. Government does have a certain amount of surface water reservoirs and they manage those. So they do tend to give it, but mostly focused on irrigation. So most of the water goes there. And the second one is that water is a fundamental right and a constitutional right. So that has been politicized. And as a result, it's a political tool rather than assuring a fundamental or a constitutional right. I think that has to come in, and mechanisms to address that have to come in uh, very strongly for this to happen. Once that happens and that awareness is built through education and maybe at a high school level, I feel that a little bit of a really a bottoms up approach and a really a strong push from the bottom will force the government to get into that particular aspect of it. And otherwise, it's very easy way to say that, okay, let's bring in tankers or let's bring in mobilize the water. And that becomes a very expensive and a very detrimental proposition. So I feel that two, three things which need to be done is one is ensuring that these fundamental and constitutional rights are really respected and adhered to. And second thing, which is bringing the awareness through education at a very young age, starting at a kindergarten level also, and at various levels you can bring in that this is my fundamental right and why is water important. I think that behavior change is very important. Putting out the infrastructure that's the easy part, I think, but getting these mechanisms to manage and the governance part is the most important part to make access to water easily available. Thanks.
Thank you. Should we move on, or any thoughts, David and Olivia? Okay, no worries. The next question then is this, another one I've received. Over 150, and this one I think perhaps is directed again to all three of you, but David and Olivia more perhaps. So over 150 of the 193 UN member nations have already recognized the right to a healthy environment, whether that be through constitutions or general legislation. What are the benefits and advantages? What are the advantages and disadvantages, of recognizing the environment as a right at the UN level? What are the potential consequences and criticisms?
Well, I can start off if David wants to jump in after. Well, it's a great question. It's really about how you build political will to address a variety of different issues. So what you want is governments to feel and eventually be held accountable for protecting the weak, protecting those that can't take care of themselves, right? And it is the more you build this into the political system and the international relations system, the more you can hold these governments to account. So the fact that so many governments have said they recognize this right, that's really important. And therefore, not only other governments and nonprofits and other actors, but their citizens can hold them accountable for that and say, hey, this is something that we think is important. You recognize the importance of that. And therefore, you should be held accountable for living up to those expectations. And it's really an important part of a development in a sense of obligations and enforcement.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Olivia said, of course, I'm in complete agreement with her. There's a gap in the international human rights framework. I mean, there are a number of gaps, but a very important gap is environment. There is no comprehensive convention on environmental rights in the way that there is on the rights of children, the CRC, rights of children, the Convention Against Torture, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, et cetera. And so, although, yes, it's a good development, but there is greater support in the UN. The step that's missing is carrying that forward to the drafting of a comprehensive core human rights convention that addresses environmental rights. And it's understandable that there are reasons, unfortunately, why that hasn't yet been done. And just one other point, which I think underlies what all three of us have been talking about, is the need to address the drivers of some of these problems. I mean, why is it that a poacher in Kenya will, poachers in Kenya will risk their lives for $5 or $10 for a rhinoceros horn. That of course will be sold for thousands of dollars by the, to the ultimate consumers. It's poverty, lack of opportunity, and lack of education, and so forth, although ultimately probably poverty. And without addressing the drivers, whether it's in whichever sort of area of human rights, human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, child trafficking, et cetera, we will always be playing catch up, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for your response. I completely agree with you all as well. I think we might have time for one or two more questions, just depending on what the time situation is like. This one, I think, can of course be answered by all three of you, and certainly can also apply to all three of you and your work. Is the rather simple question from the Q&A section: how do we balance our way of life and being conscientious about our impact on others, for example, the environment or people? The example this question uses is, she loves meat, but it's so bad for the environment. And I think from a water perspective, Ravi, as well, it could be the simple comparison. People love taking long, warm showers. Again, it wastes water. So I think this is a very basic question that might not be the most academic, but is on the front minds of pretty much every average person out there, which is, how do we balance our way of life versus what's actually for the greater good? And how can perhaps organizations, the government, entice people, maybe through the free market, through any other kind of driven means, to do what's better for the world and for our future?
Dan, thanks for this question, and I've been thinking a lot about it also. And there are some very interesting ways of looking at it. One is, I'm a proponent that at least there should be some kind of a pricing mechanism for water. And when it becomes a pricing mechanism where you have to ensure easy accessibility to a certain base level, and as you're consuming more, the pricing should be rising very exponentially. As a result, you deter excessive usage or wasteful usage of water. If you look at a city like Johannesburg, they've done it wonderfully, where the poorest of the poor have very easy access to water, a certain quantity of water. But as you use more and more, it really pinches you or hurts you. That is one thing. Second thing is, if you look at some of the countries which have done really good work on agricultural water, most of the countries consume a lot of water in agriculture. You look at especially Israel and Singapore, though they are small and less populous countries, but they've really led the way, where the amount of water which they recycle and reuse for agriculture is amazing. And interestingly, they price agricultural water almost at the same rate as potable water. So I think they've used economic mechanism to do that particular part out here. And driving that is important. And especially in the context of India, what I look at it is, there has to be some kind of a mechanism to incentivize saving about 1 to 2% of water every year for agriculture, which can then be diverted to potable use, industrial use, because that's going to be required going forward. The population is rising. It's going to peak probably in mid-2030s, and you will require water to grow economically as well as for people. So we'll have to do something about these agri crops. So there is a education awareness plays a tremendous role out here. So if we take that into account, that would be very good. And also technology. For example, I believe in California, there are laws that you cannot have high flow showers and such things. So I feel that technology can also play a role. So there is multiple ways we can approach this, and we have to do a little bit, because that incremental effect is going to really help us take care of this particular part.
Great, thank you so much, Ravi. And yeah, we just have 1 minute left, so any closing thoughts from David and Olivia? We can go one, each of you as well, if you.
No, I'll turn my time over to Olivia. I think she has more to say on this than I do.
Well, I think Ravi said it excellently. So we need to think creatively, right? How do we use different tools and techniques to stimulate good behavior, to avoid behavior that needs to be avoided? I think in terms of like the wildlife crime area, like really focusing on those species that are most vulnerable, leaving some room for people that, she loves me. What are the types of things that you can still do while not putting the planet in danger, and using technology to help us achieve that. So I think we've made a good start with that discussion today. Thank you.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you all very much. Thanks for being here and sharing your thoughts. So we'll turn it over to Anu.